Introduction to what is called Bible numerics. Some people really have no end in mind before they begin, and then sometimes if we have an end in mind, we can somehow manipulate our numbers to that end. But it's really interesting the uh, things that can be demonstrated from the Bible. For example, in this book by Dr. John Penn, The Bible Doctrine of Time, Difficult Problems in Creation Solved. This is all a PDF downloadable. Go to baptistlamp.org, and under LTI, LAMP Theological Institute, you will find this PDF free of charge, and just download it. But we'll just look at a couple of things, and I plan on doing a formal series through that book, and then do one through his hermeneutics book, do one through the comments on the book of Romans as the inflection from the language and the use of it, and then using his holistic hermeneutic and how it would influence the interpreter by continuing to include everything in the text and let the text itself be the source that governs and guides. And then I'll do a series through his introduction to the Bible Doctrine of Time, then do a series through his book, The Planet Earth, The First Adam and the Planet Earth, and I don't know what else he has, but anyway, Jesus Christ, the Planet Earth, that book as well. So those will be forthcoming, but just some interesting things for numerics. Sometimes people say, where do you get that? Well, for example, in the Hebrew language, let's just start with that for a moment. Hebrew language, and that's biblical Hebrew. First, it's numeric. It's phonetic. And then, as we would say, alphanumeric. So here's the alpha, it means a letter, and here's a number, and then it's also pictographic. So, for example, that letter, first letter, Aleph, there, and that's the word Aleph, or the word for the letter. So it's numeric value, which is very fascinating. And Dr. Penn enjoyed he enjoyed schooling me, because I like to think I was the person helping him with the languages, but he schools me quite a bit, and he enjoys doing that, and I'm glad he does. So its numeric value is the number 1, and also the value 1000. So that's quite a remarkable consideration when we think of how, for people who would read that language, and in the Eastern Oriental language, if we can somehow just step away from our Western Occidental mind, we now have a letter who has a numeric value of 1 and also 1000. And the sound, it's silent. It's silent. And yet we pronounce it as we do our letter A. We just, A, you can spell out A, but we just say A. Sometimes, like Aleph. But it's intended to be silent, and it's quite a remarkable story about that letter. But now pictographic, as a picture, it derived from an ox head, which you can see the ox head, the horns, and then the head, and that. And of course, that was the strength, and there was the horns. And this is a picture. And of course, it's become now, like for example, when I write it, I just have a straight line. And it's a very crude way that I write it, about like anything else I write. So we have the numeric, it's silent, we have the picture, we have the implication of its meaning, strong, it refers to highest. And that's very interesting when we think of numerics, because when the discussion of the age of the earth, which if you are like we are not subservient to denominated constructs or doctrines that men somehow expect us to use the Bible to support something. We're free to support the Bible and prefer to do that anyway. And it certainly brings interesting responses from people. But when you talk about the age of the earth, that's a number. So, for example, in this book here, Difficult Problems Solved, one of the many things is proof of the 360-day lunar year, which according to Judaism, or Jews for Judaism, their website, they seek to debunk that because of the implication of the prophecy of the Old Testament. For example, I'll read the one that was recorded, and it was speaking of the 173,880 days. I'll just read on page 97. It says here, in J. Sidlow Baxter's Explore the Book, he quoted here, between the decree to rebuild Jerusalem and the public advent of Christ, that's between March 14, 445 BC, and the 6th day of April, AD 32, Sir Robert tells us that it was exactly 173,880 days. That's 483 prophetic years of 360 days. So lending credibility to that 360 day can be done by also, in this book of Dr. Penn's, the 6th literal day. That's proven, QED, it's proven. The 360 lunar year, he proves that. And it just goes on because it demonstrates the credibility of the Bible. But really what's fascinating is, unless you really want to use the Bible to construct an understanding of something that has become somewhat of a controversy, like I said, some people have talked with me about a guy named Bill Nye, and they say he's the science guy. Just with a cursory review of some of his material, the first thing I did was say Bill Nye ain't no science guy, and I know why I shouldn't use ain't. That's why I love using it. But Bill Nye ain't no science guy, but he wants to speak against the view of the earth and 6,000 years ago, and he tries to diminish it. And he's really not that aware of his audience, because there are people in the audience. Of course, he's not targeting those who are thinking, and he's not being honest with time. Time's not linear. He knows that, or maybe he doesn't know that. So in this, if you were being ridiculed because you couldn't defend an assertion, let's say you happen to prefer advocating a young earth view, but you really don't have numbers to demonstrate that, other than citing Ussher's number date that was inserted in 1701, which really puts you in a codependent relationship with what Ussher said. but we have numbers in the Bible. So as far as Bible numerics, Dr. John Penn's observations are really unsurpassed because they are in the Bible. Psalm 90, which was written by Moses, the author of Genesis. And we'll just look at that for just a moment. But when you think of the age of the earth, that's a number. And when you think of people who try to belittle and despise Christianity, and people who want to do, as John Piper called it, a normal reading, even he was trying to find a way to appreciate the young earth movement by saying, well, according to a normal reading. So I guess according to a normal reading, then we wouldn't be supporters of Calvinism or Arminianism either if we use normal reading as our basis for determining the accuracy of our interpretation. So hats off to John Piper for giving all of us, I guess, the freedom to read the Bible normally. It's funny when something becomes popular how people have to regroup and try to catch up because they don't want to be left behind. But you don't have to be left behind. And again, as I've had a lot of humiliating experiences under the guided directions of Dr. John Penn, my friend Eddie Johnson and I collaborate and we talk, and I call Dr. Robert Kelly. We try to, so Brother Penn can see much further down the road, and his insights are very, very valuable. But he reminded of the text where Jesus said there's 12 hours in the day. He also spoke where the Bible speaks of day and night. So when you say 24 hours, you're really being inclusive of both of these. And when we go to Exodus where it says man worked 6 days and rest on the seventh, or the Lord worked 6 days and rest on the seventh, and that we are, that text is used to demonstrate the literal, we work 12 hours, and then we don't work that 12-hour daylight period. So night is no work and that. So that was a large observation he made, because we then can say, well, here's thousands of years, and 12 out of the 500 is when you take approximately 6,250 and then double it by including both of the volumes of time, and then you take it times the 360 days, that lunar, and that equals 4.5 million days. And you remember in Psalm 90, Moses said 1 day was as 1,000 years. And you notice the unit that's being measured or likened is a day and years. The number, though, 1 and 1,000, that's already something that was very normative or normal for them to understand. Something can be 1 and also 1,000. So here it's his usage of a day and years. Well, then you can see if you just use that 1 to 1,000, and you know this is day and this is years, and you plug that in between this disparate argument that people have today where science is literally undermining the credibility of the Bible and ridiculing it. Some famous physicist out there, Neil deGrasse, was mocking young Earth. Even Dr. William Lane Craig was taking the 4.5 billion assertion by science, and yet others were having to co-depend upon Usher, which is quite fallible. He unfortunately wanted to subscribe to a 1996 end of the world, October 23rd, and that didn't quite happen. But it's still very close how he calculated, but I don't think he would have ever thought he would be in the midst of such a controversial argument. But again, this is Bible numerics. It's not the science of chronology. I don't know how he did that. I would maybe someday if I have that time and interest, I would love to study that and see how he did that. But 360 days gives us 4.5 million days, and then of course times 1,000 years equals 4.5 billion. And especially when you apply this to Genesis 1:1, the first earth, and you think of how under that circumstance, even when, as Dr. Penn's observed, when it came to be without form and void, removing without the form, it became empty, as anything without form is unintelligible. Well, what happened? Well, if you remember 1,000 years per day, not one day is 1,000 years, but 1,000 years is as a day. And if that were a velocity, that's approximately 36 times greater than the speed of light, and that what has been discussed as that catapulting of the first earth. And there, just from that, a person can demonstrate in any science conversation with any level, whether it be while someone's in school, let's say junior high, high school, or someone's in college, someone's in graduate work, you can have this conversation using Bible numbers and be quite intelligible and giving a rationale for your understanding of time that far surpasses the popular conversation, which is really not reflecting the inclusion of the numbers. Since we're talking about age of the earth, remember age is a number. Age is a number. And then we remember that how long something's existed and how old it is never the same in the Bible when something's created. So that's just a few of the things. But Bible numerics helps understand. And then we see the decay rate, where 90% of the lifespan of all 100% humanity was removed in one judgment by God. So Adam, when he deliberately disobeyed God and disobeyed the specific command God specifically commanded him, and ate deliberately from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which he was told from which he may not eat, he died within 1,000-year. No one lived outside that 1,000-year day, and he died instantly, spiritually speaking. And he lived 930 years. So we see that no one, Methuselah was the closest one, 969 years, but they all died within that 1,000 years. But then Psalm 90 says that was taken away, because once man had his day, then God judged the earth. The flood was then sent, and mankind began to transition after the flood to hundreds, and then 200s, and then now we are within that approximate 120 years. So we're looking at from 1,000-year, a curse to 1,000-year lifespan, to approximately 120-year lifespan or less, and more often less. And yet today, without an appreciation for these numbers and the compression of time that God has decreed, people might quickly, and ironically quickly, forget that we're only living a fraction of the time span of the curse of Adam. For today, if we were cursed with 1,000-year lifespan, that somewhere in there between Adam 930 and up to Methuselah 969, we'd consider that the fountain of youth. But we live in a very, very short moment now, a fraction of the time that was apportioned in the judgment against Adam. So he went from never die to within 1,000 years, and then we now live in the time span where we are looking at just 10% of that. So also in this book, Dr. Penn will introduce the decay rate, showing as Noah, for example, in his 500s was building an ark. Well, he was in his 500s like a man today in his 50s. If 930-year-old Noah were at his funeral, and a 93-year-old man from today were there, and both of their funerals were underway, and you attended it, you couldn't distinguish which one was 93 today and which one was 930 then, because the decay rates accelerated. So those are some fascinating insights. But Bible numerics really demonstrate the credibility of first the Bible, which is all that matters. But when you see that people years ago had used the Bible to even demonstrate the veracity and its accuracy and its inspiration of predicting Christ literally to the day, and prophesying him, I should more rather have said, and then using a 360-day calendar, and then noticing that when we use Bible numerics, we can demonstrate that that is accurate and without dispute. And then things like this are just beyond the despite of secular humanists and atheists who would try to somehow say that's just another. Well, when you take all the numerics together and you realize you can demonstrate 6 literal days, you can demonstrate instant creation, Genesis 1:1, and prove it. And then you can explain what happened in verse 2. You can then support the prophecy of Christ and defend him from the Bible. And you can defend the 360-day. And you can teach how God is in his control, judged man, and you can see how he judged Adam and it was true, and then you can see how he judged mankind, the thoughts and imagination of men during that day of man. That first Adam had his day on earth. Well, the last Adam, when he returns, will have his day on the earth, and that 1,000-year reign under the rule of the last Adam, Jesus Christ. He will replenish the earth, which Adam refused to do. We will see the tribes of Israel, they're ruling. He'll be on the throne of David. We'll see everything that he intended to accomplish first through Adam. The first Adam replenished the earth. He'll have it, the millennial reign, it'll be regenerated. Then we will see what was intended to be accomplished through them, that will be there. We'll see how Gentiles grafted in. We'll see how people who trusted the gospel and were declared right out from the faithfulness of Christ are now children of Abraham by faith in Christ Jesus. And it'll all be for Christ's glory, and it'll demonstrate God's faithfulness to his purpose. And it will also demonstrate that it was he who took that responsibility. It behooved him. His character is what obligated him to fulfill everything he intended. So when Adam failed him, he will, and he did conquer that. And in Romans, the 5th chapter, talks about how the offense of Adam, the obedience of Christ, hyper abounded, super abounded that. So where Adam failed, Christ prevailed and super prevailed. And that grace, speaking of Jesus and that act of him, super, hyper prevailed it. And then the replenished earth, the earth will be replenished. Christ was faithful to repair it, to make it habitable for man. And then what he intended to accomplish through Israel, he will accomplish then to all of his glory, his Father's glory, and he'll be there. So it's all good. You can read these numbers, numerics. I even use this to help some of our young people when I tutor in arithmetic, multiplication, things like that. Especially reminding them how credible the Bible is, and then how astute they can become in their conversations. And when you can have a conversational Christianity at any level, in any subject, in any field, it's only because of the sufficiency of the Scriptures. So that's just an introduction, but a formal review of the lessons, and just a sample of what you can enjoy And then he has a seventh book he's working on right now that he's wrapping that up now. So this is a good resource. Enjoy it, and help your friends out. I hate to see atheists ridicule young earthers when it's so much easier for me to help them. And I hate to see people who advocate old earth do so from sources outside the Bible rather than just take the Bible and demonstrate that. So especially when scientists who reject the scriptures are not prepared, they will never be prepared for someone who studies the Bible, because stereotypically they judge people, prejudge people who believe the Bible, and aren't prepared for Bible students to demonstrate relativity, a ratio of 1 day to 1,000 years or 1,000 years to 1 day. They aren't prepared for Bible students to say time isn't linear and to call their hand on that. So whether you're a young person in school, high school, college, you can enjoy an engaging conversation and even help your science teacher catch up with the Bible and the knowledge that people had almost 4,000 years ago in written form. So God didn't leave us without knowledge, and he didn't leave himself without a witness. So you enjoy this lesson, and all feedback for improvements. I don't like change. I do love improving. Feedback to me is invited, encouraged. I like feedback. Dr. Johnson likes it. Dr. Kelly, all of us that study and collaborate together, we love information and feedback to improve our knowledge. So you have a blessed day.